19 minutes after 12 o'clock, a young woman simply named or identified as Kaylee, along with her mother, are suing Meta and Google in Los Angeles. The case sounds like it was ripped from a Hollywood script. Kaylee says when she was a child, she suffered harm to her mental and physical health by becoming addicted to social media sites such as Instagram and YouTube. The companies are accused of intentionally designing their platforms to be addictive to young people despite the harms that come with compulsive use. The corporations behind the platforms Snapchat and TikTok have already settled with the plaintiff. Some tech watchers believe this will be the first of many such cases, and they compare it to previous lawsuits against tobacco companies. It was found that Big Tobacco knew the harm smoking causes to your health, but deliberately downplayed that and failed to acknowledge the addictive quality of smoking. Well, today we're going to take a deep dive into the effects of social media, specifically on young people, but also adults. And we're asking, how concerned are you about social media addiction among young people in your life? What effect are such sites having on the health of youth and their attention spans? And if you're an adult, do you find once you're scrolling through a social media site, it's difficult to stop? Or can you take it or leave it? We're keen to hear your thoughts, so give us a call. The number is 1-800-565-1940, and our email is marnoon@cbc.ca. Jenna Post is with the Nova Scotia chapter of the group Unplugged Canada. It's an advocacy group pushing for parents to delay the introduction of smartphones and social media for youth until they're at least 14. And Jenna joins me in our Halifax studio. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
We're also joined by Kelly Lamrock, who is New Brunswick's child and youth advocate. He's in our CBC studio in Fredericton. Kelly, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Bob.
Welcome back, I say, because you and I have talked about this in the past, haven't we, when it comes to social media, but so much changes so quickly, it seems. The algorithms seem to get smarter. The prevalence of social media sites certainly hasn't decreased over time. What did you think of that lawsuit in California?
Well, we'll see what the specifics of that case bring, but it's certainly familiar. I think I've mentioned to you before when I was on, I was also part of the cabinet that in New Brunswick launched the lawsuit against some of the large tobacco companies for failing to disclose what was in their product and deep sixing research where they knew it was addictive and harmful and putting great costs on the healthcare system. In almost every democratic country, the advent of social media tracks with an explosion in youth mental health cases, and correlation itself isn't causation, but what we do know is that governments still don't require social media companies to share their algorithm, the so-called secret sauce of social media apps that says, look, we manage to extract from what you do watch and what you linger on and what you may send in your messages what will interest you. And we give you more and more of what you already like. And that's a way of keeping people watching. As the intro quoted me as saying, there's only two ways social media companies make money. Keep you watching to drive up the ad rates and mine your data. And now with the advent of AI, we're seeing algorithms that increasingly engage people in conversations and say, people are almost told, hey, use this as a replacement for companionship, for advice, for any number of things. And more, we're seeing cases where AI companions are telling people what they want to hear, but maybe not what they need to hear, because the algorithm is built to keep you engaged, and hearing what we don't already agree with turns us off. As to whether or not that's good, as we're seeing more and more tech companies now say they're going to build companions that should actually engage people socially, or that they can turn to for expert advice on things like mental health or day-to-day challenges or family problems, we have to wonder, look, as a lawyer, I always have to remember, my job isn't always to give an answer that'll make my client happy. It is to tell them what they need to know and speak correctly about what the law is and what their options are. If I were paid by the minute to just keep people talking and I didn't have to disclose how I do that, I wouldn't be a good lawyer. I would fall short of that professional duty, and more we are going to see that as long as algorithms are secret.
Well, and so, Jenna, more and more, do you think we're going to see more court cases like the one that's unfolding in California?
Yeah, there's another 1,600, I think, that are coming right after this one. So this is really just the first of many that are going to be put to trial, in addition to the case that's also going on in New Mexico right now that was brought forward by the Attorney General there.
Yeah. Kelly mentioned algorithms and how they are continuing to develop and seemingly working overtime to keep us glued to social media sites. You've got an interesting perspective when it comes to how these sites work. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you know how powerful these algorithms in these sites can be?
I mean, my background's been working in the technology sector for the last almost 20 years, but that is also what has shaped how I parent my kids and how I actually delay the introduction of this kind of technology, because I understand how it's built to be addictive and how it is doing its job. It is finding the content that will keep you the most engaged and continue to serve it to you. And unfortunately, some of the most engaging content for youth is usually the most harmful to them or the most violent in many cases. And so it's concerning to just see as AI gets even better, it's just going to continue to refine that and continue to show, to show that feed that is going to keep you on as long as possible, because that's what drives their ad revenue, that drives their engagement, and that's what they're incentivized to continue to do.
And you've alluded to it, and perhaps not surprising given your position with Unplugged Canada, then your children are not on social media.
No, they're definitely young enough right now. They wouldn't be. They're 6 and 8, but even they don't have tablets. We don't allow them on YouTube. We do movie nights on Fridays, and that's kind of how we engage with technology because, again, I understand how these products are built to be addictive. I worked on building applications for many years to actually flag and remove harmful content on social media, so I understand the kind of content that proliferates on these platforms, and it's not appropriate for youth.
It's interesting because in Kaylee's case, in the California case, she says that she was on YouTube since the age of 6, and she was on Instagram since the age of 9. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty early, isn't it?
It is.
Perhaps there would be examples of people on there far earlier than that.
I think there is when you see that, the iPad generation of the youngest kids now. Majority of kids under 2 have their own iPad or tablet, and many of them do have access to YouTube Kids, which I think has a fallacy of being seen as safe, because there's actually been quite a bit of studies out there that show that it is still keeping their attention. It's fracturing their attention. It's giving them that dopamine hit that they get used to needing that novelty, and everyday life becomes a little more boring, and it's taking away from that in-person interactions. And you see that speech delay and developmental delays that can happen when they get it so young.
And Kelly, you touched on that as well. It seems like there's a long list of concerning side effects, I guess, of time spent, or an extreme amount of time spent on social media sites. What are some of the other impacts that you're thinking of when you talk about this whole dilemma?
We are seeing across national boundaries 2 changes in how social media use is hardwiring our brains, and the younger we start, the more built in this is. One is that there is a cratering of attention span, that the ability of young people to engage critically or to think logically or to even listen to a detailed story or explanation has fallen apart. Indeed, we have seen a significant drop-off in what's called persistence, which is the ability of a young person to stay with a story or to grow impatient with having to think logically and solve a novel problem. This is even manifesting in fairly broad ways. The average length of a Billboard Top 40 hit is almost a minute shorter than it was when I was following the charts more closely as a 14-year-old in the 1980s. The other thing we're seeing is a drop in critical thinking skills. And this is in part because we're starting to no longer engage in problem solving. It sounds funny, but think of a simple scenario that might happen. You're sitting at a bar with a friend and someone says, by the way, who was the MVP of the Stanley Cup playoffs in 1985? And you might think, well, let's think of who the top scorers were and who won that year. You engage it may be in a very light way. This isn't like doing a doctoral thesis, but you actually have to think of facts to create likelihoods and then do it. And we used to do that 100 times. Now we know what we do. We Google it. And while that can be handy, we're starting to lose that. In fact, this is one of the questions around AI that is concerning a lot of people. People will now pitch AI to people and say, hey, if you're, say you're someone like me, a 56-year-old lawyer, you don't have to go read cases and do briefs, and you can just farm that out. You don't even have to hire a young lawyer to do it. The interesting part about that, though, is where do tomorrow's 56-year-old lawyers with the expertise to sort through that come from? The reason I'm able to do this well at 56 and direct other lawyers is because at 27, I had to do the grunt work of reading cases, of looking for things, of understanding what I'm looking for. If we remove all intellectual grunt work, that may be great for people like me who are in their 50s today. It may mean that 30 years from now, we don't have any more people with the intellectual bandwidth to actually guide that work. And these are the things, in 100 ways now, can we do it is moving faster than should we do it. And governments have proven relatively impotent in the face of that. It was actually a rare case in New Brunswick a couple of weeks ago when the government announced it will get off Twitter because they didn't want to be a part of Elon Musk monetizing the sexualization of minors. Mm-hmm. And good on them for moving quickly. It's rare to find a government who will stand up to companies that now transcend national borders, and that, no other industry has done well being completely free of any regulation with the public good in mind. And I think governments are going to have to find a backbone soon.
There's so much to talk about when it comes to this topic. We're talking about social media sites today. What effect are the sites having on the health of young people and their attention spans? And I would add as adults as well, because lots of adults feeling the impact of social media sites as well, I suspect. 1-800-565-1940 is the number, and our email is marnoon@cbc.ca. We've got a couple of guests with us today, taking your questions and adding their thoughts, and we want to hear from you. First, though, let's hear from Cassie Williams, who has a look at the latest news headlines. Hi, Cassie.
Hi, Bob. Well, right now, dozens of people from Indigenous, environmental and labour groups are rallying outside of Nova Scotia's provincial legislative building to protest the $130 million in budget cuts the Houston government revealed in last week's budget. Also in the news, a 29-year-old man has been found guilty of killing a Dieppe, New Brunswick couple in 2019. The jury unanimously found Jansen Brian Baker guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, delivering the verdict at 7:30 yesterday evening. And efforts are underway to modernize the 911 operating system, both on PEI and right across the country. The current system was designed to work for landline phones. The new system will be designed for smartphones. The hope is, before long, you'll be able to send texts and videos to dispatchers. And I will have more news coming up at 1.
All right, 1-800-565-1940, smartphones in the news, and the topic of today's phone-in as well. Here on Maritime Noon, we're talking about social media sites specifically and the effect they're having on the health of young people, but I would add adults as well, when it comes to their attention spans and the like. Jenna Post is with us, who is with the Nova Scotia chapter of Unplugged Canada, and Kelly Lamrock is New Brunswick's child and youth advocate, joining us from our studio in Fredericton. And Jenna, just before the news break there, Kelly was talking about the attention span and the issue there. I was also wondering if one of the other harms centers around the whole notion of creativity. Absolutely. And the lack of creativity because of the way people are using social media.
Yeah, I think, both the social media and AI, because I think, both of those are sort of taking away from the opportunity for kids to be bored. When they're spending so much time in these kind of apps, they're not actually using that opportunity to just get creative, pick up more hobbies. And it's starting to also sort of narrow their thinking into a certain direction, again, potentially based on that algorithm. So it starts to really shape how they see the world and where they see themselves in it. And with the introduction of AI, again, it's shortcutting a lot of that opportunity for kids to, create stories or create poems when they just tend to now go to ChatGPT and get it to create that for them. So,
all right. So, what's the approach here to address the issue? I mean, your group is heavily involved with trying to convince people to get unplugged, and perhaps intuitively people know that's what they should be doing. But the difficulty of doing that in a household setting, mm-hmm. we can all hear some of the to and fro that would be taking place between members of the family trying to navigate this. So where do you start with people? How do you encourage them to take that step of reducing the amount of time on social media?
Well, I think the first thing that Unplugged kind of really stands for is trying to first delay smartphones. So if kids don't get smartphones until they're into high school, then they have less of a chance to have that in their pocket and want to be on social media. And then we also do advocate for, yes, parents to try to delay as long as possible, but that's incredibly hard when everybody else has it. Mm-hmm. So that's why our group has also been advocating for our Canadians government to modernize their legislation. And ideally put in a layered approach, put in, like we did with driving. We didn't just put in an age minimum for driving. We have an age minimum for driving. We have driver education. We have legislation that makes sure that these cars or products are safe. And even when kids get their license at 16, we don't just hand them over the keys. They also have a graduated system where the next 2 years they've got limited access. And I think we need to take a similar approach when it comes to social media, because parents can only go so far in the household, but they need help to help shift these norms and help show that this is not appropriate for youth. The companies already tell us that it's not appropriate for under 13, but there's no mechanism to really truly block them, because a 6-year-old can create an account today and get on there. So we really do need legislation to complement parents also making choices in their household.
Well, Kelly, how difficult do you think that is, given that we're talking about global companies here, certainly that stretch far beyond any provincial boundaries? I mean, are we talking about federal legislation required, or, how even successful do you think that would be to go that route?
I think it's a start, and I think, first of all, it is possible. It starts with governments accepting that this is a legitimate part of their job, that just as any other industry needs to be regulated, because otherwise you seek profit without that counterbalance of the public good, which is what elected governments do, then you start doing it. The European Union has actually been most aggressive at it. In fact, it was a few weeks ago, France raided the offices of X because they're actually opening investigations, as is happening now in the UK, as to this. X allowed users to use their AI robot to take pictures of people, and Grok you could then place them into sexualized situations or show them undressed, and they didn't police it for minors. And people are actually holding them accountable for that, which I think is good. If we can't somehow draw the line at sexualizing minor children, then we've really lost the plot in terms of the idea government can do anything. So I think you absolutely can. It is better if governments coordinate. But we have also seen, even when national governments act alone, and say, if you want access to our market, you have to behave responsibly. You need to disclose your algorithm. You need to actually take real steps to police the use of minors, to protect them from things like sexual contacts or contacts from adults who they don't know. You need to be able to limit and police underage use. You need to disclose what are you doing in terms of what posts are you promoting, something that is a big part of the mental health crisis we're going through right now. Early on, social media companies discovered that posts that engage us, that keep us watching, are not ones that engage us logically. They make us angry. They make us emotional. They make us sad. They make us confrontational. Confrontation is a big way to get eyeballs on things.
It's a moneymaker.
Confrontation is a moneymaker. I mean, of course it is, right? Ask Jake Paul and Mike Tyson if a well-promoted confrontation can get in big dollars, even if people don't do it very well. You watched a mediocre fighter fight an old man, and people said, yeah, I'll watch that. But we're not made to be at high-pitched emotions 24/7. Our brains aren't hardwired, and young brains especially aren't, because they are incredibly susceptible to emotional manipulation. One thing, I became a dad again for the 4th time in my 50s. One thing is, I think a lot of Gen Xers can relate to this. Early on, there was a sense, this technology is not only benign, but you better learn to master it, because that's how the world's going to be. Mm-hmm. And I won't make that mistake, especially unsupervised time with cell phones. My goodness, I would say to parents, do not allow people to go and doom scroll. Either if you're getting your news from the high-pitched voices on social media, the world is going to be angry and confusing. If you are engaging with friends constantly, then the kinds of dramas of adolescence don't have an off switch. And our brains aren't meant to take that when we're young. And that, I think, is one of the most important things. So, yes, governments have a role to play, but parents have power too.
But just to drill down on that one point there, Kelly, which is, kids and interacting online. I mean, kids make plans on sites like Snapchat, and that's the way of communicating. They don't pick up a telephone anymore and call their buddies and say, let's get together and do something. It's always on the internet. So I'm just wondering about that dynamic. If you take away those apps and those pieces of technology. I mean, are you in some ways limiting the young person? And I'll get your thoughts on that and then go to Jenna after you.
For sure. And I look, as a parent, this is not a new problem. There have always been things. My parents wrestled with it with video games, I'm sure, that a little bit is necessary. We all do that even on our tablets. Last night my wife's out of town. My daughter, we took out our iPad and we FaceTime so she could say goodnight to her mom. And these things are now so embedded. I even wrestle with, how do I read my book without being bothered by social media notifications and setting my tablet up to make sure there are blackouts or that it's Wi-Fi disabled is something I do for my own mind. You can do that too. You can, even for older children, you can say, look, you might have a phone, but at 8 or 9 o'clock, you need to put it down. All these ways in which we do it the same way. I say to my daughter right now that, one cake pop at Starbucks is great. 6 isn't. And we have to manage the fact we're human and have those social needs with making our teenagers mindful and challenging ourselves in what we model. Mindful use of technology instead of mindless scrolling is such an important thing, and we have to all get better at it, myself included.
All right, so Jenna, what about, a son or daughter says, Mom, Dad, you can't take away Snapchat because that's the way I plan with my kids or my friends to go out and do things. How do you navigate that?
Well, if they're using it to just organize plans, that's no different than texting. Mm-hmm. So I find that interesting when I've heard that many times from parents of teenagers right now who say that, but there's so many other elements within Snapchat that is not used for actually coordinating, going out and finding, making those plans, like the snap streaks that create that anxiety around this like performative friendships where you have to snap each other every day and again sharing those temporary images and what that can lead to for what kind of images get shared. So I find it interesting that just kids have kind of been saying, well, I use Snapchat to talk and make plans with my friends, but there's absolutely no difference between that and texting. So I just find that an interesting argument from them.
All right. Well, 1-800-565-1940 is the number. We're talking about social media sites. What impact do you think the sites have on the health of young people and parents, and when it comes to attention spans and other matters? And you can also send us an email at marnoon@cbc.ca if you prefer. But we're going to go to the phones right now. And Carson Lee is calling from the Shediac Bridge area in New Brunswick. Hi, Carson.
Good afternoon to you, sir, and to your guests.
And what do you think as far as the impact that social media sites are having?
I listened to, and I'm sure your guests are familiar with the name, I listened to Jeffrey Hinton yesterday. And it was a CBC program. And he spoke very eloquently about if we do not withdraw, subdue, step back, the AI premise, artificial intelligence, is going to do us in. Similarly to what we're talking about today, it's correlated. I use social media, but of course I'm now 60 years old. But I detest, in a sense, technology. I'm not a tech buff, and I try not to get too deeply involved, but I do use it with the basic understanding of it. I've seen very, very, very small babies and their parents put an iPad or whatever device they put in their hands. Mm-hmm. It is difficult for us to withdraw from this at this stage, but we cannot retreat. I commend Australia for putting certain conditions in place for youth with social media posts and all the whole going on in social media. If we do not, listen to this, we blame politicians periodically when it's convenient, when politicians or governments try to get involved, we say hands off, and then when things are to our detriment, then we blame them.
Okay. Well, Carson, since you've raised Australia, let's spend a few minutes talking about Australia, Jenna, because Australia has moved, Carson is right, to make it illegal specifically for people under the age of 16 to be on social media sites. What do you think of that approach?
Well, one thing I'll clarify, it's not making it illegal for kids to be under under 16 on it. They've put on the onus on the companies to put reasonable steps to keep kids off of creating and maintaining accounts on social media. So there's a bit of a concern there. Some people feel like if a kid is caught on social media that they're going to be in trouble, like they might be with underage drinking or something. It is different in that respect. But that has been a huge global leadership movement to put in that first age minimum for social media. All the social companies have complied. Mm-hmm. They have put in some age assurance technology to try to, as best they can, estimate the age of the user trying to create an account. And they've eliminated 5 million accounts within the first 6 weeks, which is far greater than what the Australian government expected to be removed immediately. It's not perfect. There's still some kids who are finding ways to get around it because it's estimating age. So, those within a few years of that 16, you might have some slip through. So we do need to continue to see that process improve, but it has instantly made a difference as far as setting an expectation with parents that this is not appropriate. It's given a lot more parents power to say no, and it is keeping the majority of kids from being able to create and maintain an account on social media.
So, Kelly, do you think that's a good example of the heft of a country making some significant changes?
It absolutely is, and I think that movement is going to grow. I hope we cross Rubicon into not just limiting use, but regulating and getting into the steps that social media has to take to, some of it just in disclosure. I think we should know how the algorithms work, and I think we should know how our data is used, and I think those are things that all of us, so that we can better protect ourselves and our families, are a part of it. But yeah, I'm glad Carson brought it up. I think what Australia is doing is very interesting, and some people do use the canard that, you won't completely stop it. Well, I can tell you with absolute existential certainty that the fact there's a minimum drinking age doesn't stop all 16-year-olds from getting a pint of vodka either. I can tell you that certainly didn't in the 1980s. But that doesn't mean, I think, that we should just give up and say, oh, well, there are no regulations. Anytime you increase the cost of the activity, any time you make it more difficult for people to do it, anytime you even create that social stigma around it, then you at least make people mindful, as we do even if we don't completely stop teen smoking and drinking. You make people mindful of, well, maybe this isn't a completely benign activity, and that we should be aware that there are downsides. Even when I was 16 and sneaking a drink, I at least knew from the fact that I wasn't supposed to be, that there were probably things I should be out the lookout for.
All right. Well, Terry has sent us an email here and writes, as a 40-year-old male, I got to grow up and transition from using phones on the wall and single-line dial-up internet to having ready access at my fingertips today. I was lucky enough to struggle with internet addiction as a teen and got over that quite quick, but it has left a lasting impression on my life. The more research I hear, the more I am starting to think that my depression and anxiety could have stemmed from social media and internet use through my teenage years. However, I've managed those symptoms and I've avoided social media addiction in my adult life. In the past 20 years, I hardly spent any time on Facebook or Twitter, and I don't even have an X account. I wonder if it actually is social media or constant access to the internet in general that can lead to these things. It may just be the social isolation from the continuous use of an addictive object, much like gambling. Kelly, did you want to respond to that? Is it social media, or is it the internet in general, or do you make a distinction even?
I do, to some degree, in that the internet is sort of like a highway. Social media is how people will use that, and large corporations use it well or poorly. I mean, there are something that one reason I had to work and question my own social media is, when I spent a year working in Tunisia, it was a vital lifeline to me to go on Facebook, because that was how I could at least have some contact with my world back home. So there are, it's always going to be with us. But I think we have to be mindful of how companies will do it. There's a good book by Cory Doctorow. The way I can say it on CBC is it's called In Poopification. And he actually points out that a lot of these apps, companies behave like companies do. One thing that's different with social media, unlike the phone, as Corey as your caller mentioned, is that companies can create a sunk cost situation for us. So once enough people are on Facebook, or enough people are on this app, enough teens are on Snapchat, well, now I can't leave it no matter how bad they make the service. I think all of us who use Facebook are aware of that, I used to be able to just scroll and see what my friends are doing. Now I see about 8 ads and things I don't want to see before I see anyone from friends. Delivery apps largely kill off local alternatives. Uber and Lyft kill off local alternatives and then begin to raise the cost of the service and squeeze your employees more. Once we're all in a location and there is no competition, that's when companies are then free to begin making it more expensive to mine more data, to launch more unwanted content at us. And so that's another reason why, again, you need some regulation. These things are often killing local alternatives like simple communication and then leveraging that against us. And I think that's the process that makes social media a little different than the technology platform itself. It was difficult to do that with a phone. Companies, once they create a critical mass and we all feel we have no choice but to stay there, will then begin to behave more capriciously with us.
Jenna, what about evidence or maybe a lack of evidence that an addiction to social media can be a gateway to other addictions, or that it can lead to other addictions? Is there any evidence that suggests, some people seem to be more addicted than others. Is that something that would carry through to other facets of their life when it comes to other addictive substances?
Yeah, there has been some research that shows, again, the younger you are exposed to any kind of addictive substance, it just means that as you move through your life, you're more susceptible to being addicted to other products as well. So right now, social media and these devices are what kids are getting the most exposed to at such an early age, and it can shape and form because their brain is still developing. They're more susceptible to the influence of these devices, and that can have a lasting impact. The person who wrote in, I think they sort of shared that's exactly what they've had to do a lot of work to try to make sure that they can't get sucked into social media and have the same kind of addiction they had earlier with the overall general internet use.
All right. So following up that, then Stephanie Mahoney sent an email addressed to you, Jenna, saying that you mentioned legislation for delaying social media, which Stephanie thinks is an excellent idea. But the question is, how can parents help support a legislation that would keep our kids protected from social media and smartphones and help them get back to just being kids? There are so many pressures nowadays for us as parents, and some parents are just apathetic. How do we help support these changes at a legislative level so that this becomes the new norm instead of the trajectory we're on?
Parent voices are extremely valuable in this conversation. And so I'd encourage parents, if you're concerned about this, to reach out to your MP and voice that you want to see change here in Canada. We need to have those voices amplified to get the attention of our government and show that there is broad support. We have seen in polling in Canada, there was a poll done by Ipsos last fall that showed that 84% of Canadians actually agreed that kids should be at least 16 to get onto social media. And there was a more recent one done by the National Post that showed 90%. So we just need to continue to see parents also using their voice in this movement to show their support for it. And then again, have conversations with other parents, because we can't always wait for legislation, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And if you want to start to make change now, it's being willing to have the hard conversations with other parents and trying to create that community, which is what Unplugged tries to do, is connect folks who are sharing this similar concern and create a community around it so you feel less alone. And you can have, more parents delaying means your kid won't be the only one who doesn't have access to these devices. And the power of that is really important.
Yeah, would cut down on the fear of missing out component. Mm-hmm. Kelly?
Everything there is correct. Speak to politicians and see if voices of people can override those of lobbyists. I'm going to mention something very important parents can do, is say yes to some things like responsible unsupervised play, like some appropriate risky play, like pushing at local level to create spaces where teenagers and young people can socialize, where kids can explore. One thing is we've actually, as parents, grown more risk-adverse when it comes to outdoor play. And some of it is now, an offshoot of the internet is we can read about one child abduction one time in Utah and everybody hears about it, and we suddenly become very nervous. We don't often let kids walk to school anymore. We've become so afraid of the off-random chance that children might encounter freaks and weirdos in their everyday life, so we now put them online where they're definitely going to encounter freaks and weirdos all the time. And, that's not good. Children are meant to have appropriate risky play. They're supposed to be able to take modest risks, or they don't learn how to do it and they develop anxiety later. There's been a number of interesting studies of young people, and they've asked the question a little differently. Why do you spend so much time online? And a pattern that's emerging in focus groups is young people are often saying, well, actually, it's because it's the only place I can go anywhere and be unsupervised. The parent who doesn't let their 8-year-old leave their front yard, and governments who sometimes don't give very vague child protection guidelines, are part of the problem. We actually just had a right to play forum with educators, parents, physical activity folks. And something that came across is if we don't defend the right for appropriate unsupervised play, age appropriate for kids, of course they're going to turn to the internet because that's the only place a kid can actually mingle with other kids without grown-ups hovering over them. So hovercraft parenting is something we have to address, and we have to say yes to more talking to other kids face to face, even in ways that might push our comfort zone if we're not going to make the internet the only place kids can explore.
And Jenna, just to pick up on Kelly's point about where the real risks are in life, whether it's online or outdoors, you mentioned a statistic about cybertip.ca and how many actual cases of child sexual exploitation they deal with.
30,000 in 2024.
In 1 year.
In 1 year in Canada. And there's a quote from the FBI director who said exactly kind of what Kelly's saying, is that the kid who's on an iPad or their smartphone in their bedroom alone is at far greater risk than the kid who's playing down the street at a playground by themselves. And many cases when you do hear of these abductions, much of that starts from them interacting with them online first and gaining their trust, and then that moves to in person. So parents need to start to let go and give those opportunities. I love that Kelly said, say yes to more. And I agree with that 100%. Say yes to more opportunities to get them in person, to give them opportunities to show independence, free play, age-appropriate risk-taking. Kids are losing that. There's kids, you'd think you'd hear a stat that says there's a lot less kids getting broken bones these days would be a good thing, but it's because they're actually taking a lot less risks and they're not actually having that opportunity to kind of explore their boundaries and what they can and can't do. And so we need to create more spaces for especially teens. Those spaces have kind of disappeared over the last decade or so. We need to get more spaces where they can actually come together in person and socialize without the need to do that online.
So Jenna, you would like people to unplug, as your organization says. Failing that, what do you think about the idea of these tracking apps, the ability that parents do have to track what the young people in their family are doing on their phones? Is that at least getting it 50% right, or how do you feel about those?
I mean, I think it depends on the parent. Some people feel a lot of comfort knowing they can either track where their kid is or have some, oversight as to what they're doing on their phone. But there's also an element you got to think about as far as that kid knows that parent isn't actually always watching, always knowing where they are. So it, again, builds a little bit of this thought of they don't really trust me. Although when it comes to, again, monitoring what they're doing on their device, I think there's more good to that than not. It's more about that, having your eye tag in their kid's backpack 24/7 so you can tell where they are. There is a lot of studies that are coming out talking about the psychology of what that does to kids. Because I can know when I was growing up, my parents didn't know where I was all the time. Sometimes I'd be forgotten to get picked up from an after-school event, and I'd have to just wait and hope that somebody could go home and call and get a hold of them. So I think there's just a shift there that went too far with parents of just feeling this need to be connected to their kid 24/7. And we need to let go a little bit to give them that ability to know that we trust them and they have independence.
All right, Kelly, we have to run in a minute. Did you want to add one final thought before we say goodbye?
I would just underline, I think what Jenna said is it's always good to know what your kids are doing online and to manage time. But I do want to push back on the idea. Something I heard a lot when New Brunswick looked at removing cell phones from kids is a few parents said to me, but I have to contact my kids 6 times a day to make sure they're doing well. And actually, no, your kid won't do well if you do that. Stop that. You don't need to be connected. We all, I remember if there was using the payphone at Albert Street Middle School sometimes, talking the operator into connecting me to my home phone so I could tell my dad where I was. We figured it out, and you know what? that's a good thing for kids to do. Otherwise, they get to university or college or independent life, and the first time they're told to figure something out, they can't do it without anxiety.
Yeah. All right. We'll leave it there. Kelly, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much.
And Jenna, thanks for coming into the Halifax studio.
Thank you.
Jenna Post is with the Nova Scotia chapter of Unplugged Canada, and Kelly Lamrock is New Brunswick's child and youth advocate.